Financial Money Printing for Philosophy 213. I am one of many students in my class, and I am currently writing a book about the U.S. government. And my talk today is about hopefully getting the U.S. government and corporations in the same sphere of regulation. And I'm a free market economist. And I believe that if U.S. consumers have the right information, then they will make good voting decisions, and the U.S. eventually will make good budgetary decisions. But as it stands right now, we do not have that in America, so we have a few things to change. Before I start today, I did survey my audience. We had 6 college students who provided forms, 2 online and 4 manual. Most of them felt like they didn't have enough information to make good decisions about whether or not the U.S. should make changes or not. And I think that goes to my talk today. I think it reinforces my initial thoughts. But to get started today, Lending 101, when you go to a bank and try to borrow money as a person, they look at your prior credit history, your cash flow, and your assets. The U.S. government is no different. When they go to the bank or they try to do financing opportunities, lenders look at their credit history, their cash flow, and assets and security. The issue is the U.S. government sort of claims that everything in the United States is theirs, when in reality, at the time of the Constitution, they didn't really own anything, and nor did the states, because everything was a land grant. So the fact that we've entered treaties and the U.S. government sort of now technically owns land, it's all encumbered land, and it's really not worth all that much. So when you go to do borrowing and you go to do financing, they look at your cash flow and primarily, and the U.S. government has had negative cash flow for the last 20 years, and just Joe Biden alone has lost $7.7 trillion, which was more than the last 40 presidents before him. Today, U.S. deficits have grown from $5 trillion in 2000 to over $35 trillion, according to the U.S. government GAO. Now, today, the U.S. Congress is sort of bridging older Americans by printing money. They are making sure that older generations can retire at their standard of living that they've had in the past. They do COLA adjustments. They provide other benefits like medical care, and they have bridge premiums and trued things up over time. But the truth is the U.S. government has had no cash flow for 20 years. They have almost no assets it can sell, and really all we own is military gear and maybe the land that the post office is riding on, but that's pretty much it. So when we go to print money, and we're printing money with no value underneath them, we're essentially doing what is called fraud. It's really financial fraud, and there's lots of case law related to it. Now, the U.S. government has been printing money, and we look at it as the money supply, and it has increased dramatically since COVID. Now, I believe it's a criminal action to print money when you don't have any. But I do understand that in times of crisis that there may be some changes. But to go back in time a little bit, in 1776, when the U.S. government was formed, it didn't have any revenue. It didn't have any land. It really didn't have anything at all. And in his book, David McCullough talks about even soldiers coming to fight the British Army were paid for by the states. And the land that they lived on was a land grant from King Charles himself. So everything that was really involved at the time of our formation really wasn't ours at all. And until the U.S. government started collecting its own taxes, it didn't have any revenue until the 1800s. Now, right after we formed, we filed the Declaration of Independence. We're starting to form. England's went to war with us again in the War of 1812, and they actually marched to Washington and burned it down. So uncertainty in our property has been something that we are used to dealing with. Now, today, the U.S. government is losing $2 trillion a year, and we need to have an answer. And so our call to action is to bring market forces to bear by getting the SEC to regulate the U.S. government just like they regulate corporations. If the U.S. government files GAAP financials and the president at the end of the year talks about them, then American consumers will have the information they need to make good decisions. So we're proposing a Financial Accountability Act. It essentially does just that. It just makes the U.S. government follow SEC guidelines. I have a few more bullet points here that I'll include with my slide, but that's at the end of the day. And what we really seek is that the SEC becomes part of the U.S. court system and regulates both the U.S. government and corporations alike. Now, we have some other opportunities for change in America. Supreme Court vetoes, Supreme Court actions deleted a line item veto that was very important for Bill Clinton. A federal branch system is a possibility, and changes in how the U.S. military budgets would be certain things that we could do to make sure that our borrowing is supported by assets. Now, when I go and say the U.S. government is insolvent, there's some criticisms of me in that the U.S. government does own Fannie and Freddie Mac, and they own 70% of mortgages in America today. So if the U.S. defaulted, then certainly those assets could be brought to bear over a longer period. And in addition to that, the U.S. government could force its own debt back to the states, but not likely to get passage. So we think that state governors need to exercise their power by suing the U.S. government on original jurisdiction in the Supreme Court and bringing the U.S. government into a probate action, not just for a short period of time, but we might need 10 or 20 years of U.S. government regulation